And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bubba the Bat Flip, episode 62. We head to the outfield for the 2021 2021, I said that right, early outfield fantasy baseball preview. It sounds weird. It's actually going to be reality here soon. We're going to, hit around 30 or so, maybe more players this episode. We'll pick up more next week. Got a lot of listener questions this week, which is always awesome and appreciated from you guys. You guys kick butt in that, so that's much appreciated. Before we get into the brass tacks of it all, you can find me on Twitter at BDentric. My co-host, as always, on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. Toby, how we doing?
We're doing well. It is a 2021 preview, Bubba, and it feels weird, but that's what we're doing. We've got a series of them. They've all been amazing so far. I would anticipate nothing less. In all humility speaking, I would expect nothing less than the best podcast you've ever heard about outfielders for 2021 tonight. But things are good.
Yeah, you mentioned the best podcast out there. So if people are paying attention, you'll see stuff coming up in the coming weeks. I shamelessly nominated us for podcast of the year. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. We'll see how we finish in that. But everybody said we should have been nominated last year, so I slid the nomination recommendation under the door. We'll see if they accept it, but I put it in there.
I think that's still humble because I saw a tweet earlier today by one Alex Chamberlain at Dolph Haldhagen on Twitter. Very good friend of the podcast and an incredible writer and researcher, an FSWA winner who said that you should nominate your own podcast. So, but that being said, Bubba has nominated the Bubba and the Bat Flip podcast. Yep. Now the question is, can other people do it? Because I'm going to put a shameless plug in there to nominate us as well to make sure that we end up there. Because we bring you content year around. Yep. And this content isn't just good, Bubba. It's not just great. It's exceptional. Every Sunday night, Monday night, or Tuesday night, depending on when our children are going to bed.
Yep.
So,
if they want to keep pushing the envelope, just email the guys over at FSWA. All media, podcast, videos, whatever, those categories, you have to email them the request. That you can't just fill out the form online. So, if you guys want to, go for it. If not, in the coming weeks, somehow there'll be a way to vote, and we will bug you incessantly about that to make it happen. So it's just fun. I figured it'd be interesting to see where it goes after the kind words last season from people. I figured, let's give it a shot, see what happens. And I got the email about a week ago, and we're in. So let's see what happens.
Well, that's amazing, Bubba. And having the smartest listeners of any fantasy baseball podcast out there, and you'll see that by the questions that we got tonight. Yeah. I was like getting jazzed up just looking at the questions that people were putting in because they're really thoughtful, really great questions. So having the smartest listeners certainly helps you when you nominate, when you're nominated for something like that. So we'll see what fate has in store for us.
Yeah, December 15th, and we're getting very intelligent, strategy questions, let alone the nicest listeners, because they leave with, I apologize, this is not an outfield question, but it's cool. Keep them coming. It's all good. But let's get into the outfield. Last year, we found a formula where we went through the NFBC ADP. These are going to be from starting November 14th, so about a month, give or take. Draft champions drafts. We kind of group them in pods of 5, like 1 through 5, 6 through 10, so on and so forth. So we don't go one by one, but we kind of give our quick thoughts on the region. And we'll go through a handful tonight. Like I said, we'll do more next week and go kind of deeper long shot guys and whatnot there. But we'll kick it off with the easy crew. It's like when we talk starting pitching, you got the big 3. When you're talking outfield, it's pretty much the standard guys. You can kind of make mix and matches of spots if you really want to. But you got a Cunha at 1. Mookie Betts is number 2, Soto 3, Trout 4, Yelich 5. They're going at pick 1.4, 3, 5 for Soto. Trout's all the way down almost 6 or 7. Christian Yelich is around pick 12 or 13, but he's gone as high as 4. So some people are still in love with Christian Yelich. But when you're looking at these 5 guys, the big 5 basically, there's still some more, but big 5, what are you looking at with this group?
Yeah, I think you can't really go wrong with any of them. I don't have any major concerns. With Soto and Trout, you have to just consider the fact that obviously exceptional profiles going to come with maybe slightly less speed. Although, with what Soto was able to do last year, in the shortened season, was pretty great. So there's fewer concerns, I think, than when he came up about what you would get in the profile. but they're all really good. Obviously, Yelich with the small sample size and kind of some question marks coming there after being, for a lot of people, the number one pick last year. But I think when you kind of look under the hood, there are some issues with the contact rate, obviously, but those improved as the season progressed. You see the 259 BABIP when his career BABIP is 354. When you look at his StatCast metrics as well, he had the highest exit velocity of his career. The max exit velo was down a little bit, so maybe pointing at maybe some injury issues, although it's kind of in line with everything that he did before 2019. The barrel rate was solid. The hard hit rate was the highest of his career as well. So I don't think there's too much of a reason to be concerned with Yelich. The only, obviously he had the knee issue last year, so maybe that was bothering him. Maybe he doesn't run as much as he has before. But either way, I think you're getting, a 30-20 guy with close to a 300 batting average when all is said and done this year. So you could be getting some value there. With all of these guys, the one thing that I'll point out about Mookie Betts is for people who focus on projections, Steamer has his batting average projection very low for him at 273. He's hit 290 the last couple years, then well over 300. Then he had a 264 year, but that was pretty much an aberration, I think, with what we've seen before that. And if you look at his batting average, even this past year, it could have been a lot better. Oftentimes we talk on the podcast about looking, especially over smaller sample sizes, at the ground ball rate as opposed to like a fly ball rate or a line drive rate. Well, Mookie had pretty much the same ground ball rate that he traditionally has, but a 3% lower line drive rate. So those went for fly balls. So maybe those impacted the BABIP a little bit. I think over the longer course of the season, he's going to point more towards that 24% mark, which will boost that batting average. So I think, you project him at a 290 plus batting average. And then, his valuation in the projections and the valuation models will jump up there. So I just say, if you're somebody who kind of plugs in their projection to generate a dollar value and you're using Steamer, just be a little bit hesitant there, to believe that. I think you need to bump that up a little bit to get his true value. But outside that, these guys are all great, right?
Yeah, no, they're all great. I like the Betts comment there because he's not going to hit 273 unless things are kind of wrong with him. And if that's the case, well, it was already going to be frustrating to begin with. Hitting at the top of that Dodgers order with the protection behind him, it's going to be tough to pitch around Mookie Betts as much as they want to. So I think that's a good call. I always love Cunha. I'm glad people are seeing him as number one. He legit has 40-30 upside. Like when we talked about Tatis at shortstop last week, these guys are like peas in a pod to me. It's like if you think Tatis is the top shortstop and he's worthy of a top 2 or 3 pick, well, Cunha to me is that when it comes to the outfield for what he can do for you in steals and homers compared to these other guys, because they're all going to contribute somewhere. But it's kind of where you kind of differentiate a bit, like Trout, not really stealing as much anymore. I think that's why he's sliding. Still a phenomenal player. Like if you can get him at 6 or 7, like if we were talking a year or two ago on this show and said, hey, in 2021 drafts, Mike Trout's going to go, after pick 6, maybe some guys are getting him like a 9 or 10 in drafts. We'd all be laughing. Like they'd be like, no way we'd believe that. But that's where we're at. So that's kind of one of those awesome little things that falls in your lap and you won't complain about. But for me, it comes down to Juan Soto or Ronald Acuna. And that the difference is the stolen bases with Acuna. But Juan Soto is going to lock you in a batting average. He's going to get you everything else in all the categories. And if you're in an OBP league, he's just an absolute monster. So like in the best ball formats that are points leagues, I've been trying to get Soto in a lot of places early in drafts if I can. I think he's an absolute monster. I know when we play Barf OBP wise, Soto flies off the board. And for good reasons. So the fun discussion to me is Soto versus Cunha. I think that's a fun one because Betts is Betts. He's very good. I have no problem with him going second on this list, and the rest are good. Yelich, I agree with what you said. I think there's got to be some comeback there. You got to imagine the injuries are kind of catching up with him at times because he still showed certain things that lined up with what Yelich can do, and it's just a kind of couple tweaks here and there. So I'm with you. All 5 guys, absolutely outstanding. Can't really complain too much in this range. All right, 6 through 10, you got Bellinger going around pick 16, Harper around 20, Kyle Tucker, which I can't wait to hear your thoughts here because you're taking him everywhere in drafts, at pick 30, Lou Bob at 32, and Whit Merrifield at 40. So a little bit more separation in this range. You can kind of plant flags on certain guys here. How do you feel about 6 through 10?
Yeah, I feel okay about it. I mean, for Bellinger, I'm not that into Bellinger. I mean, the projections like him a lot, although they project him for 40 home runs. And I think the challenge with Bellinger is that outside of that first half of 2019, he hasn't been. I mean, he's been very good, don't get me wrong, but he's been like a 260 guy and not like a 300 guy, right? And so the projections have him at 282, which seems really high for me. Obviously, they're factoring in that 305 batting average. But when you look at kind of the underlying metrics there, the line drive rate was absurdly high that year. So he had his lowest ground ball rate and his highest line drive rate about 5% higher than he's had at any other point during his career. And so I think that really was the driver of the batting average. But outside of that, he and the home runs are obviously the driver of that. But his 62 game pace outside of that 2019 season, 39 home runs, 25 home runs, 12 home runs last year in the shortened season, but in about 250 plate appearances. So if you extrapolate that out to, 600, a little bit more than 600, you're still looking at about 30 home runs, which I think is more what I would have for a projection than the 40. And obviously Steamer is smarter than me, but just kind of thinking here out loud. So for Bellinger, the first base eligibility is super helpful. I don't think you necessarily go wrong in taking him here, but I do think that you need to factor in that his batting average may be a little bit lower than it's projected for right now. And that home run total, I think, will also be a little bit lower there. So, that's kind of how I generally feel about him. I think similarly with Harper, people are very into Harper. And again, for good reason, an incredibly good player. But when you look at the batting average totals that he's been providing, right? 249, 260, 268 last year. The stolen bases have been increasing, which is really nice. But still, you're not necessarily getting that batting average. So you are getting steals with that power, but the batting average isn't necessarily helping you. And so it's just something that you have to factor in as you build your team out, is just, if I'm not getting a high batting average guy with my first or second round pick with one of these guys, how am I going to compensate for that? And there's obviously different ways that you can do that, but it's just something you need to think about, from a roster construction standpoint. So maybe it's like you're taking a Jeff McNeil around pick 100 later on. Maybe it's you're going for another high batting average type of guy there. Do you want me to just roll through these, or do you want to go into Belly and Harper a little bit here?
No, go ahead and roll through them, and then I'll come behind you and give my thoughts, and let's keep on trucking.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of Bryce Harper, and I think that's always been my issue with Harper. I do think that he's a better hitter, and I feel more comfortable with what the batting average floor is with him now, because I think I should look before I say this, but yeah, his contact rate had improved from last year, where it was kind of a scary below 70%. So I feel pretty good about him. I really like Kyle Tucker a lot this year. And I know people are kind of like, man, you're drafting him twice in the upper 20s. There's some skepticism there. And I totally understand it, because we only have a small season sample size here that we're dealing with. But I just love when you look underneath the hood on Kyle Tucker in a few different ways. I always love guys who hit for power but have really high contact rates, just because, for me, what it gives a little bit of a batting average floor, and it also represents volume. So whereas with Tucker, for instance, the StatCast data may not jump off the page. He doesn't have that max exit velo. He doesn't have that barrel rate necessarily that we're looking for in like an elite power hitter, but he puts the ball in play a lot more. And so as a result, he has a lot more chances to hit home runs. And so you're going to see that volume of balls in play be a lot higher, which gives him an opportunity not only for a higher batting average if luck swings his way, but also just of putting batted balls, in play and getting more fly balls. Like, I guess a clearer way to say that is if you have two guys with the same fly ball rate, and one puts the ball in play, a lot more, and one puts the ball in play less, you're going to have a lot higher volume of fly balls over the course of a full season. So I really like that about Tucker. You know, he hit 268 last year. You know, his 269 in 2019, a very small sample, obviously. But the contact rate overall better than league average by over 2%. The in-zone contact rate right around league average. Again, the batted ball quality metrics don't necessarily jump off the page, but he's got a below league average ground ball rate at 38%, around 40% for his career. So that's really nice. He should move into that cleanup spot, I think, for the Astros. So you'll probably have, I'm assuming, Altuve leading off at this point in time. I know I'm going to forget one of their hitters. Oh, you're probably going to have Bregman hitting 2, I would assume. Tucker actually hitting 3 in that lineup, and maybe Yordan Alvarez batting 4th. Something like that, depending on what they do in free agency and acquisitions, things of that nature. So I just think that just sets him up to be so good. And then when you look at the stolen bases, I mean, in 372 plate appearances so far in the big leagues, he's got 14 stolen bases. He's only been caught twice. He doesn't have the elite sprint speed, but what that tells me, although we're dealing with a small sample, is that he's good at base stealing. He picks the right spots to steal. 8 stolen bases in the shortened season and 228 plate appearances. Steamer has him projected for 30 home runs and 20 stolen bases, which is awesome. And the 257 batting average, I think that's reasonable, but I do think that with the increase in contact that he had, not only over the course of the season, but towards the second half of the season, that increased even more. He's just a tough at bat. And so I can actually see a pretty decent ceiling on that batting average if things roll the right way. So to summarize my lengthy diatribe on Kyle Tucker, increased contact rate gives him a higher floor for that batting average. And then you're getting a 30-20 guy, I think, for home runs and stolen bases with a little bit of upside on that stolen bases as well. So really love Tucker right there. You know, Lou Bob, you know, again, the stolen bases and the power, I think, will be there, but we saw what you're going to get. We saw the variance in the profile. I think he hit like 290 the first half of the season. Then he hit like 130 the second half of the season. That's the type of variance you're going to get with that type of chase. But again, he's in a very good lineup. You know, he's in a great division in terms of the pitching being awful, and you're going to get that power and speed. Just a little bit of a concern about the batting average. So you need to build in, you know, and I think the difference between him and like a Bellinger and a Harper is like, for those guys, you know, maybe the floor for the batting average is like a 240, 250. Lou Bob, it's pretty low. It's like a 220, you know, and the OBP is not going to be that helpful. And you could see him being dropped, you know, further down in the lineup as a result of that. So I'm probably not going to be in on Lou Bob all that much this year for that reason, just because I think you can still make up for the home run and the speed, and getting that type of a batting average dud early on is not something that I'm super interested in. And then with Whit Merrifield, you know, talking about him as an outfielder, I think is fine because he's got that dual position eligibility. But if you're drafting him as your second baseman here, I think. And so the dual position eligibility adds something. We talked in the second base preview, you know, the batting average is there. The stolen bases were super exciting to see. They've improved that lineup through free agency already with Carlos Santana there. It's an exciting lineup. He's going to do really well. I think he's about solid where he's going right now. And I won't talk too much more because that was a mouthful that I just provided on those 5 players.
Yeah. Cody Bellinger, I don't understand the averages you're saying. So that's a tough one for me to take him at that point in the draft. There's other options at pick 16, basically the turn, that I'd be going for another pitcher, another shortstop potentially that fell there. Freddie Freeman, like Cody Bellinger is not one of the guys I'd be looking at that point in the draft. So I'm always out on Cody Bellinger. And honestly, if I'm taking a guy with a suspect average situation in the outfield, I'd rather take Bryce Harper. I really think he's got more upside than Cody Bellinger. I know Bellinger's put up the numbers, but I am one of the guys that just loves Harper. I don't seem to draft him often because I still think 20 is kind of rich. But if you're in the right draft where he kind of falls because maybe pitching goes aggressively, or like you can get him on the back end of round 2 or something, I'm more inclined to it than at pick 20. But I do believe Harper. It's one of those guys that we've seen him put an MVP season together, so we know what the ceiling is. and playing in Philadelphia in that ballpark and in that lineup, the ceiling's always attainable. So I think that's a situation where things are pretty interesting. So I understand the Harper love. It's a little rich at pick 20, I'll be honest. And the batting average, that's just so with him, there's such a big peaks and valley, I think, with the batting average compared to certain other guys. We're like, okay, you can kind of put them in a certain window and they should hit somewhere in there. Harper, we could see hit like 310 or 320, or you could hit like 240. Like, you wouldn't be shocked by the variance in Bryce Harper's average, but he's still going to get you homers. He's running more, like you said. The counting stats will be great. So it's just one of those, like you said, with some of those guys, maybe you make sure you get a batting average asset later in your draft if that's the route you go. Again, kind of tough at pick 20. Tucker, I love. I just don't know if I'm going to be able to bite off this price tag for him and Lou Bob. I like both of these guys a ton. There's so many question marks for me at this point in the draft. And that's why I wanted to hear your explanation on Tucker, because we know you're more of a pitchers, JT Realmuto kind of safety net, full package situation, where Tucker, we don't really like. We know the talent's there, and I believe one day he will be an elite outfielder. Is it this year? Is it another couple of years with some more experience? That's the big question. So he could win you leagues. There's no question about that. And I think that's what you're going for when you're picking him. At the same time, I just wonder, for a guy that really hasn't put it all together just yet because he hasn't had consistent playing time, are there going to be some interesting hiccups? And that's very, very possible. So it'll be interesting to see with Tucker. I think that's going to be a fun one to track this year because the talent's through the roof. I've claimed forever when they were threatening to trade Kyle Tucker, I said, trade anybody else in your farm system. Like when they traded Teoscar and all those guys, do not trade Kyle Tucker. Like that's one of those guys you just don't do, especially now with Springer leaving town. You keep Tucker there. And then Whit Merrifield, we talked about him on the second base show. I've preached my love for Whit Merrifield for a couple years now. I think he's phenomenal as a second baseman. I'm with you there. At pick 40, I'm not drafting him as an outfielder. The guy we'll talk about next at pick 40, I would draft as an outfielder, not Whit Merrifield. He's a second baseman. If you want to take him early, I get it. Second baseman's weak, and he pretty much hits you up in 5 categories. And his stolen base skills are legit. He's not like a lights out power guy, but he's sneakily gonna get you like maybe 15 or so. So he's a nice asset to have there in Kansas City. So I agree with what you had on that one.
A couple pieces just that you reminded me of when you were talking about him too is with Bellinger, with the Bellinger and Harper thing, like the OBP that Harper puts up on a consistent basis is massive.
He had and like 20% walk rate last year.
Yeah, I mean it's really incredible. And then with Bellinger, he's got the shoulder injury too, right? I mean that's not nothing because I feel like it was also something where, when Kike gave him that really strong high five, that kind of dislodged it. But it sounded like there was some issues there before as well. And he's a tinkerer too. I can't remember whose podcast I was listening to.
He's messing with his swing last year.
He's always messing with his swing, Bellinger is. And then the one thing with Merrifield too, which I think you mentioned was that 15 home runs, that 10 to 15 home runs. And I think there's such a big difference for guys that give you speed that have kind of that level of home runs, because when you think about it from like an overall standpoint, like 80th percentile, like I do with NFBC, is like, if your whole team needs to average 23 home runs, when you have a guy that averages 15, you can compensate for that pretty solidly. But when you get into the single digits, because I was having a conversation about the difference between Tommy Edman, for me at least, and Darren Fletcher earlier today on Twitter. And it's like, you can spread out those 8 home runs that you're missing from Whit Merrifield. But then when you're missing, like 15 or so, then you're at those kind of add up. And I really like to stay away from those single digit home run guys, at least in the core of my team. So I think that's a really key point that you mentioned there.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And that's something we try to drill home is like 5 categories as early as possible. Eventually you hit a point in ADP where it's just not going to happen anymore. But that's where you make up for, I got a bunch of steals, but I need to make up for some of the home runs. Okay, I'm going to go grab a Randall Grichuk later or something. So along those lines and try to balance it out. But I think that's a good point as well. And if you're looking for guys with tons of power to make up for your Merrifield situation, to pick the 11th outfielder out the board, to pick 40 right behind him is Eloy Jimenez, it'll be an interesting discussion this time next year if he's top 5-ish in this. Like he's got that potential as well. You got Marcelo Zuna at 45. I think we're just waiting to see where he lands because that could change things real quickly. Starling Marte at 47, who's no one's talking about at all. Kevin Biggio and Trent Grisham rounding out the next 5, and Grisham's at 57. So an interesting group. We've talked about Biggio before. Grisham, awesome year last year. People are riding high on that, which is always an interesting perspective. But some steady names here, and then the stud and Eloy Jimenez that makes things very interesting. So what do you like here?
Yeah, I love Eloy. I think he's fantastic. I love everything about him, and I think there's huge potential for him to unlock more as well. I mean, if you look at last year, he managed to hit 14 home runs in the short season, and that's with a 52% ground ball rate. And obviously we know, right, from Vlad Jr. and others, right, and not to go back to Vlad Jr., but that it's not easy, right, to change that launch angle. It's not easy to get that ground ball rate down. But if he can, right, even if he gets it to the point where, he was in 2019, right, where it was at around 48%, so dropping it about 4%. I mean, the amount of power that he can generate, like when he hits the ball in the air, is just absolutely phenomenal. So I think you're getting batting average, you're getting home runs, you're getting everything in a wonderful lineup. You're not getting the speed, and you obviously have to recognize that and compensate it. But one of the things that I'm thinking about more this year is, yes, the batting average and the stolen bases are important, and you need to have one of those two things. But so is just getting good hitters. And I think that's one of the things that you mentioned around Kyle Tucker that's kind of a question mark, right? With Eloy Jimenez, I think you draft him and you feel really good about getting him because I think he just crushes. He's just an exceptionally good hitter. Obviously, some question marks about where he plays. That's not a question mark for this season necessarily. And he dealt with some injuries, I think a concussion and some kind of nagging injuries a little bit towards the back half of the second half of last season. But just a phenomenal hitter, and I would love to have him on my team and draft him in the third round. Even the earlier third round, I think, is totally reasonable for him. And the projections love him too. They have him as the 30th for my spreadsheet. In my valuations, I have him at about $24. So the 30th ranked player, so well above where he's going in ADP right now. So just something to think about. I actually have him above Luis Robert, and Bryce Harper, and Kyle Tucker in those rankings. But I think the difference there for me is kind of the Kyle Tucker speed. Yeah. And with Robert, like the speed is important too, but that batting average could be absolutely dreadful. So love Eloy. And I hope to have a lot of him. Marcell Ozuna, again, he strikes me as a guy, which I think we often see, where in one year he's undervalued and in another year he's overvalued. Everything went right for him. We talked about this, right? 338 batting average last year on a 391 BABIP, career 320. He actually saw some regression from 2019 in plate discipline, and his contact rate fell by about 4%. Again, shortened season. But important to note that obviously the counting stats, the runs and RBIs were off the charts, hitting in Atlanta in the back of that incredible lineup that they had really, throughout. He didn't have any speed, which was a little bit of a disappointment, I think. But I think that batting average comes down. Steamer has him at about 277, which, maybe it's, it seems about right given what he's done in previous seasons. Right in line with his career average, maybe some improvement because the StatCast metrics were really nice. I mean, career high in exit velocity, career high in barrels. And I think some of that comes from that dip in ground ball rate, 36.7%. So down about 5%. So if he can keep that up, maybe the power metrics hold up, but I don't think that batting average does. And the context, if he's not with the Braves, right? Like I've heard about your Giants being interested in him. I don't know if I don't think that's necessarily legit, but like if he ends up in an environment where maybe the contract is better, but the environment isn't necessarily, then I'd be a little bit, concerned about him. So I'm not willing to pay what he's, I think what he's going for right this second. But, I understand, like, I think he's better than where he was going last year, which was around pick 100.
Yeah, you got Marte, Biggio, and
Oh, I've got to talk more here, Bubba. Oh my God, our poor listeners. With Starling Marte, I think he's a great buy right here, like where he's going. I haven't had an opportunity to get to him quite yet, but I mean, he essentially did last year what he usually does. The home runs were down a little bit, but again, his lowest home run per fly ball rate in a couple years. Batting average is going to be solid. He was still stealing. The Marlins are an improved team. His steamer projection is for, a 2020 season, which is really nice. They have his batting average at 268. He hasn't hit that low since 2012. He's got 281, 295, 277, 275. So somewhat reasonable, but you can certainly see a ceiling on that type of a projection. And again, you're not necessarily drafting him for the counting stats, but he should be solid hitting at the top of that Marlins lineup, which I think, should be reasonably good this year. And they normally give the green light to their hitters. So I see another 2020 season for him as being pretty likely. We've discussed Biggio before. I just really don't understand taking Biggio where he's going right now. The batting average floor is really, really low. I think the power potential is capped by that supremely low max exit velo and just batted ball quality. He hits the ball in the air a lot, but again, when he's not hitting the ball hard and in the air, and I don't think he's just going to all of a sudden like generate, a lot more exit velocity. I just think that he's really capped. And I think you can get guys that look a lot like that much, much later in the draft. And so I'm really just not into Biggio at all. I just don't think that is a good pick where he's going right now. And then with Grisham, I don't see any problems with him. I think everything's sound. He's got great plate discipline. The stolen bases and the speed looks good. The batted ball quality improved. He's hitting at the top of that lineup. I think the only things that I would mention are we have such a small sample size to deal with, and going at pick 50 is a little challenging for me because he doesn't necessarily have that high batting average ceiling, I don't think. And I just worry a little bit that Padres lineup is so deep that if he struggles at all, he could get pushed to the back of that lineup. It actually happened. He hit ninth, I think 7 or 8 times over the course of the last month, probably against lefties. And over the course of a full season, that has an impact. So again, I can't really find any major flaws in what he was able to do last year, but I'm still a little bit hesitant because again, like StatCast metrics, all of this stuff regresses. And so what's unclear to me is this kind of peak Grisham and there's regression back downward that could happen, or is this kind of the true talent level? At which case, he's going about where he should, maybe a little bit above that. So I'm not into Grisham. I probably won't have any this year, but I could also look bad because, if he stays at the top of that lineup and he's as good as he was last year, the runs are going to be really strong. The home runs will be strong. The stolen bases will be strong. And the batting average won't be great, but it won't necessarily hurt you that much.
And I'll kind of give some contrarian talk to somebody because I love Eloy Jimenez. No, not just. No, I agree with most of you said. I'm trying to.
I enjoy
to make people think deeper on some of these. Eloy, I love. I'm with you 100%. Like obviously, he's not going to steal bases. You talked about that. I agree. It's one of those positions where home runs you need X amount, stolen bases you need X amount, but the number of stolen bases is not as high as home runs, and I think you can find those stolen bases a little later, like guys that get you 8 to 10 or so here and there. So. I think you'll be okay. Obviously, that's why I like guys like Nelson Cruz. I think that's an interesting comparison because Cruz might not have the average. The last couple of years, hit over 300. Projection-wise, they got him hitting like 260-ish this year, which is a little bullish. We're still trying to see where he plays. So that could have a factor as well. But in these drafts, he's consistently going around pick 95, where Eloy's going at 40. So it's one of those, if you miss Eloy, you still kind of want that similar profile. I think Nelly Cruz, especially if he goes back to Minnesota or lands in a good spot, is a guy you can kind of pick on there to look at. Ozuna, the talent's awesome, but like you said, he's either too high or too low in draft seasons, and this might be a too high. Like I passed on him everywhere in drafts. I can't pull the trigger on him, especially not knowing where he's going to play. So it'll be interesting to see how he does again this year. The hard contact rates and all that stuff's been through the roof year in and year out. It's just a matter of elevating the baseball and making it happen. He did it last year. Can he do it again? We'll see. I love Starling Marte. I know you were big on him last year. You like him this year. I remember Todd Zola took him like super early in TGFBI. The dude's awesome. And you're pretty much going to lock in a 2020 type guy with a good average and good counting stats, like you said. I love that in my draft picks. Like if I can literally pencil in, I'm getting help in these 5 categories and above average help in these 5 categories, that makes my drafting later on so much easier. So it might not be the flashy like 40 home run guy or 40 steal guy, but you give me 25 or something, I'm a big fan of that. Pick 47-ish, 48. So you're, back into round 3, early round 4. I love a Starling Marte pick. I try to get him on my team as much as I can. It's not always easy, but I try. Biggio, I'm with you there. And then the thing with Trent Grisham, I just want to bring him up because I loved him last year. A lot of people loved him last year where you're drafting him at. And I remember I was looking at some of my old articles from last year going into the season thinking, okay, how did I do with these guys and that guy? And Grisham was one of the late round outfielders I was trying to target for the reasons he kind of specified. I believe the power was better than people thought, so on and so forth. And it panned out nicely. Problem is now you're paying premium. You're paying a 57th overall pick for a guy that, if you believe projections, 24 homers, 15 stolen bases. That's nice. I just mentioned Starling Marte 10 picks earlier going 20-20, 25-25. And Grisham's own teammate, Tommy Pham's projected to have over 20 homers and 20 steals. He's going to pick 117. And I love Tommy Pham. I would take Tommy Pham over Grisham right now if they were picking next to each other. And people might think I'm crazy for that, but I know Pham's got some injury concerns and everything. But at least we've seen Pham do it, and I think he's got more of the veteran stability in that batting order. You mentioned how Grisham could move around. Pham's not going to move around the lineup based on lefties and righties. He's hitting probably second in that lineup for the most part, no matter what, with Machado and Tatis and company all around him. So I love Tommy Pham. Grisham's a heck of a ball player, but it's tough to take him when you got Starling Marte slightly earlier. You got a guy like Springer coming up and a few like Teoscar Hernandez a little later. Some other options I'd rather have over Trent Grisham at that point in the draft. So it's interesting to see his draft, and he's gone as low as 72. So there's a lot of people that think similarly, like drop him down a little bit. We'll have a conversation. So interesting spots there.
Can I do a bold take that's not outfield related?
Sure.
I think this is the year that Nelly Cruz
bombs
is not the player that I think this is that when we start to see Nelly Cruz fade. And I'll tell you a little bit why. And I don't know if
I think you're not, it's bold, yes, but I think by his draft price, people are kind of agreeing with you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think the thing is, it's kind of like one of those Chris Sale issues. It's like the people when Chris Sale got injured that are like, told you he was going to have Tommy John. And you're like, dude, you missed out on like 8 tremendous years, right?
Yep. And
I've always been a fan of Nelly, but there are just some things from last year. And again, small sample size. But, the ground ball rate was up a lot. It was up to 46.5%. He had the worst ground ball to fly ball ratio that he's had in his entire career at 1.51. He had a BABIP of 360 and a batting average of 303. But if you look at his StatCast metrics, his expected BA was 269. His exit velocity was down 2 miles per hour. His barrel rate was down 4%. Again, still very good barrel rate, but the exit velocity was down as well. And then, his contact rate continues to go down. So he's now at 68% for his overall contact rate. We saw that strikeout rate climb up to 27.1%. So when you combine all of those things together, I just think, I think there's some things that could start to go wrong for him. So again, I love Nelly. I love everything that he's ever done for all of the fantasy community. I love all of the util only conversations that he's started, in the industry about that. But I think this may be the year that Father Time kind of catches up with him. And I hate to say that because I love Nelly and he seems like a great human being, but I'm a little concerned about him.
I think Rosario's gone and you're bashing Nelly. I think you got to get rid of that hat. I just don't think you're allowed to wear that.
I had the hat on. Oh man, get me that.
Are you trying to tell
God,
me?
I just dissed Grisham too, and I have the Padres hat. All the other hats don't fit my head anymore.
Are you trying to tell me a 40-year-old outfielder is going to finally, or utility guy's finally going to crash?
I don't know. Maybe.
Pretty crazy.
I'm sorry, Nelly. I shouldn't have worn this hat. I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know that was going to happen. If I knew that was going to happen, I would have never worn this Twins hat. All you Minnesota fans that are listening right now, I want to apologize most sincerely. You have a beautiful stadium that hopefully this year you are going to be able to attend games at. You have a wonderful team. I love your team. I love the accessories like hats that your team produces. Nelly Cruz this year, maybe I'm a little down on, but I love everybody else.
Well, you just guaranteed that he won't resign now because you're wearing the Twins hat and you're talking down. So it's just he's going to play somewhere else. 16 through 20, we're starting to get in some more interesting conversations. Like you can kind of justify most picks up till now. Gavin Biggio, maybe not, but most of them you could. Now you get kind of an interesting water here. You got George Springer at 58, Aaron Judge at 60, Randy Arozarena, talk about helium, up to 63, Teoscar at 68, and Brandon Lau, again, similar to Whit Merrifield earlier, second base outfield eligible at 72. This changes conversations a little bit more. So what are you seeing in this group of five?
Yeah, I mean, I like George Springer a lot. I mean, obviously it depends on where he lands. It seems like the Mets and the White Sox so far, and maybe the Blue Jays have all been shown interest. Maybe the Blue Jays and the Mets are a little bit ahead of that game, given the White Sox signing, who was it, Adam Eaton. Springer, I mean, great OBP, power. He's never hit in a great hitting stadium either. I've been playing with the Astros. You know, you put him at the front of that Blue Jays lineup, you put him at the front of that Mets lineup. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's just going to produce a ton of runs. Similar to what he did with the Astros. He's going to hit for power. And maybe he's never been able to steal the bases really, but maybe he finds a way to steal bases. And in the NL East, that would not be a bad place to end up, honestly, just given, kind of the stolen base landscape there, although he wouldn't be able to run against the Mets pitchers. And they did sign James McCann, which I'm not sure how good he is at holding runners. But so I do like Springer a lot. He's kind of the guy within this group that I probably like the most, which is maybe why he's at the highest ADP. Aaron Judge doesn't do anything for me. Again, I think he falls into this category of outside OBP leagues. He's a 3-category contributor. He's home runs, he's runs, he's RBIs when he's healthy. I'd much rather have, Giancarlo Stanton going 60 picks later, like he's going right now, than Judge, because they've had similar injury struggles over the last few years. And I think, Stanton, when he's in the lineup and playing, is a lot more dangerous in pretty much, every category except for maybe stolen bases, but you're not necessarily anticipating that. So Judge is just a total, no-go. And I think his ADP is finally starting to reflect kind of what he should be doing. Arozarena is interesting. He's got the upside. Obviously, he's got massive swing and miss so far in his major league career, but he's made up with that with, the home run per fly ball rate that's been elite. Steamer likes him. Steamer has him as a 25-20 guy, has him as the 52nd ranked guy. So, I mean, the power and speed gets you pretty far. The concern would be the batting average, right? And then also the Rays and just kind of the way, especially with a younger guy, they're not going to be afraid to, sit him again in bad matchups. Obviously, he's a righty, so you don't have as many splits issues, but you could kind of see that happening. And I can also see him struggling out of the gate, just a ton of swing and miss, high K rate, and they've got such a deep lineup and such a deep farm system that, it just gives me a little bit of pause. So I probably won't have any of him, but I don't necessarily think it's a terrible pick because the upside is most certainly there. With Teoscar, I love Teoscar. Obviously this year he was a reason for a lot of my success in a lot of places. And I think the batted ball quality stuff is there. I mean, the guy just mashes when he makes contact. The contact rate concerns me a little bit, and I think he's fine. I mean, I think that the areas where I have concerns about him are, number one, the BABIP was 348 last year, which maybe that reflects, the fact that he had improved batted ball quality. but all of the dip in his ground ball rate went to line drive. So I'm not sure that that's really going to hold over the course of a season. And he hit 289 with that 348 BABIP because he has a 30% K rate and the contact rate is really low. So if you see that batting average dip closer to the Steamer projection of 241, then that has a pretty big impact. And he's never really been able to steal bases consistently in the majors. 6 stolen bases this year, tied a career high, in less than half of the plate appearances he had in 2019 when he stole 6. So can he hit his projection of 9? I think, most certainly he could do that. And so I think there are a few paths to, him hitting like kind of where he's going ADP, if he's able to hit that stolen bases or even go above that, because he was certainly on a higher pace than that. And again, the batted ball quality is among the best in the league, but I just worry a little bit about some natural regression there. And that batting average concerns me a little bit. So, obviously a very high variance pick could have a massive ceiling, which we saw last year where on a per plate appearance basis, the guy was probably one of the top 10 hitters, in all of baseball. Also, we know that there's a floor there as well, but I do think the playing time is locked in. I think he's going to play. I think he's going to hit. It's just a matter of what that batting average looks like when all is said and done. And then the last guy, Brandon Lau, we talked about him at second base. I just don't love where he's going right here. He's a super high variance guy. He's improved in a lot of respects. So that's really important. Really good batted ball quality. But we saw in the playoffs in the second half of last year that he just can really struggle. And I think there's opportunities to get that type of a profile later on in drafts. And there's a lot of second basemen that I'd much rather have than him, and outfielders. I mean, Ketel Marte, Jose Altuve, who we talked about before. And then I think when you look at outfield, Lourdes Gurriel is a really interesting profile for me. Even Castellanos is kind of a similar profile, but I think a better hitter overall. So, I think Springer's really the only guy out of all of these that I see myself drafting if the ADP stays the same heading into next year.
Yeah, Springer's always a tough one for me because the talent I love depends. Obviously, I want to see where he goes for one, but I just somehow never jump on him. Given his ADP is much better this year than it's been in recent years, so it might be a year where I draft a little bit of George Springer. I just don't find myself on him very often, but the talent's awesome. If he keeps running, that was like a question mark at times. It felt like with Springer in years past, like how much is he going to run? You expect this leadoff guy to run wild. And it's been like 1 stolen base, 6, 5, 9. Like he really hasn't been the numbers we expect for him. So I've kind of been off with George Springer for the most part. Maybe a detriment to me, but as a guy I've passed on. I'm with you on Judge. It's scary because I remember digging in on him last season, preseason, and when he's healthy, the dude is probably one of the top hitters in all of baseball. Like it's ridiculous what he does. It's the if healthy part, and it's not very often. And so that's the bad part. It's one of those, like, if you're in an overall contest and you want to gamble, he could win you a league. I have no question about that at all. Like, he's that good. Just realize he could easily – this could be a lost pick as well. That's just the catch-22 of him. So how much risk are you willing to take on your draft? How much risk are you willing to take in, like, a top 65-ish pick? That becomes interesting. And usually I don't take that much risk at that point in time. Rosarena, love what he did in the postseason. I wanted to draft some Rosarena. I don't think I'll be drafting him at this price point. There's way too many question marks for me here. Like, the talent level is awesome. I just can't do it. The power speed, we saw it in full force, but the you mentioned it, being on the Rays is a huge concern of mine. There's always questions there. There's always platoon issues there. Lots of things going on there. So talent level is great. We'll see. I am in love with Teoscar Hernandez. I've drafted him in multiple places already. The batting average is going to hurt. I'm a realist on that one. I don't think he hits 289 or 290. If he can somehow sneak in like a 270, I'd be over the moon. I'd be super happy about that. And it's possible. It's that old saying, when you hit the ball as hard as you do, the batting average is great. But then again, you mentioned the contact rate, so he's not putting it in play that often. So it's a really – he's got to run hot like he did this last year or improve the contact rate. He's going to be 29 years old, still room for improvement. We've seen him improve each year over the last few years. If he can somehow sneak into like 10 stolen bases, that'd be amazing. Not counting on that, but I think the floor he brings you and the counting stats and the power is really, really strong. And if he somehow kind of puts the average together and sneaks a few steals in there, you have a heck of a ball player at this point in the draft. So I like getting Teoscar. When I draft around some of the concerns with Teoscar, but I think his ceiling with still the somewhat decent floor he brings in there, I think is a really, really good pick at this range. So I have no problem going with Teoscar. And then Brandon Lau, I probably won't have a ton of him. I might sneak a team in here and there if he falls a little bit because second base does suck, but I'm not in love with this price point for Brandon Lau at all. All right, 21 through 25. Another interesting group here. You got Conforto going about pick 74. You mentioned Lourdes Gurriel at pick 88. Castellanos at pick 90. Austin Meadows at 94. And then Dom Smith around 95, also first base eligible. So another kind of interesting range. You got another baby Blue Jay in here. You got Casty, the fallen Austin Meadows, and some others. So what's your thoughts on this range?
Yeah. Michael Conforto, do not draft him at pick 75.
This is not, you don't like Conforto at all.
Do not do it. Do not do it. I mean, and I think Michael Conforto, I should check. I should see what the projections have him as ranked here. Let's see. Oh, well, they have him ranked as the 84th. So maybe they're right. Maybe I'm over dramatizing it. I'm trying to have a hot take.
Well, a 412 BABIP is pretty serious.
I should back it up a little bit. No, I mean, I just think Michael Conforto is a really good example of recency bias and small samples and what it can do and what the narratives that it can generate. Because I think you hear like Michael Conforto has finally put it together, right? He's finally become this guy that everybody thought that he would be. But when you look under the hood, he's the exact same guy that he's always been. The difference is instead of having a 305 BABIP, which he's had for his career, he's got a 412. You actually saw regression in his ground ball rate. His ground ball rate increased from 2019 by about 5%. All of that went to line drives, though. He had a 30% line drive rate compared to 22.7. And again, I've talked a lot on the podcast about how line drive rate, especially over smaller samples, can be incredibly high variance. So that's why he has a 412 BABIP, right? He had the highest home run per fly ball rate of his career, at 22%. His hard hit rate was the same. His O swing was the same. His contact rate overall, was the same, although he did make more contact in the zone, which is definitely a plus. So it's just like, his average exit velocity was down from 2019. His max exit velo was up a little bit, which is nice. His barrel rate was the exact same as 2019. His hard hit rate was actually down. So all I'm trying to say is this is the exact same guy who we thought he was, just with an elevated line drive rate and thus a 412 BABIP, which generates so many things. Because that's the thing is we think about BABIP and we think, oh, well, that's his batting average, right? So we regress his batting average down a little bit. Well, yeah, that's his batting average, but it's also his RBI, right? It's also the runs that he scores because he gets on base. And so I really think we just need to temper it down a little bit. Steamer has him projected for, 255 with 32 home runs, 90 RBI, and 7 stolen bases, which seems reasonable, right? And that puts him at about 84th overall. So I guess I'll track it back a little bit. Maybe he's a fine pick going where he's going right now, but I just think that there are better picks to make in this particular area because if he's not helping you in batting average, then you're really looking at more of a 3-category guy with a little bit of speed, granted, but you're really looking at most of the value that he's generating is from home runs, runs, and RBI. And we know that those are the least scarce category. And so from a roster construction standpoint in this point of the draft, which honestly is kind of a little bit of a dead zone, I think, for value, just like I don't love a lot of the guys that are going in this spot. And even the group before that, I don't really love a lot of those guys. So I find myself taking a lot of starting pitchers at that particular instance or bumping up guys that I value a little bit more. I just think I'm not that into Conforto and I don't love that pick that much. Lourdes Gurriel is growing on me. Like he's one of these guys where I have in my head this bias against him, for some reason. And then I look at it and I'm like, I mean, dude is good, right? He's healthy. And I think people have mentioned
love his brother. You figured you'd love him.
I know. What is wrong with me? He's like a better version of his brother. Why don't I absolutely love him? Why does he move to first base or third base or somewhere on the infield? Like,
give him time. He played shortstop and couldn't field shortstop. So
come on, baby Blue Jays. Move Vlad Jr. to third base and move Gurriel to first base. It's maybe something halfway decent that Vlad Jr. will ever do for your team. I'm just kidding. I'm digging myself this huge hole with Vlad Jr. where I'm going to be like the guy who doesn't like Vlad Jr. And everybody's going to be like, oh, well, he blew up. And I'm going to be like, I know, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'll readily admit absolutely being totally wrong on that. But Gurriel, he does everything. He makes a ton of contact. You know, he makes great contact. The contact is improving. The O-swing is improving. And one thing that kind of stands out to me in the analysis that I've heard over the years is that, you know, when he left for the major leagues, he hadn't played for like over a year, I think, when he was defecting. And so am I making this up? And is this right?
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, he didn't play for a bunch of years. And so, you know, maybe what we're seeing is a guy who's now getting the plate appearances and he's hitting in the heart of that Blue Jays lineup and he makes contact. He hits the ball hard. He's doing everything like really well. Before I say he's doing everything really well, I think he's got the same issue as his brother. He is just a younger version of
that's what I'm saying. I don't know how you don't like him.
So, and no, the ground ball rate is low, like is right around where his brother is at with the improvement. I mean, everything is good. It's all good for Yuli. Or I'm
Lord, it's on your brain.
Oh God, you know, yeah. So it's all good for him, and he's a guy who's really kind of moving up a little bit in my estimation here, as a guy who's just, you know, he looks absolutely solid all around, and he hasn't really been on my radar. And I think these are the types of things that I could be wrong, I could be right, but these are the types of things I think that as fantasy players, we're really trying to focus on, and that we really should be spending a lot of time on is like this self-work of figuring out, I don't like this guy. Why is it? Like, what is it about this guy? Why isn't he on my radar? Why am I seeing him? Why is he going so much higher than he's been going in previous years? And everybody seems to be, you know, okay with that. And like, what's going on? And really diving into the numbers and saying, you want to know something? There's nothing wrong with this dude. There's everything right with this guy, actually. And like, this could be he could be a guy that you just see make that huge jump next year where he's going in kind of like that fourth round area with just a very overall solid profile. Damn, I need to draft him. I wish I'm gonna have to draft his brother.
We're in a draft right now where you're probably approaching round 7 or so.
I am. This is actually a really good opportunity. I just want to give a huge shout out to the DC that I'm in right now. It's a 2-hour clock. We started on Sunday afternoon. We're at pick 230 right now. In 2 days, we've gone 230. Since we started this podcast, I drafted a pick, Andrew Mccutchen, at pick 215, by the way, which I absolutely love.
I'm in love with that.
My own horn.
I have him in like every draft right now because it's ridiculous, his price tag.
Dude, I was thinking about picking him at 185.
Yeah, I'm with
between him and Schwarber. And I didn't get him. And then I came around and only one of the starting pitchers I wanted. So I went with John Means at like 207, even though that was a mistake because his min pick was 217. And I didn't check. I just drafted. But where were we before we? Oh, my DC. I mean, these guys are incredible. I'm already almost up again. And I drafted right before we started. I'm pick 5. So that's, you know, 9 guys on either side of me that have to go. So there's 18 to 20 picks. I can never figure out which one it is, but like have almost gone since I've gone. So shout out to the DC. I know none of you want to hear about that, but just a major shout out to everybody who's in DCs, who makes these things run and makes these things flow. Obviously life happens. You can't always be on it, but you guys are on it. So really appreciate that. So anyways, that's a reason for me to love Lourdes Gurriel. Castellanos, you know, I struggle a little bit with Castellanos because, you know, we saw the increased strikeout rate. We saw, he should have had more home runs, which is always the case. He's in a great ballpark, you know, and he was fine, but we didn't see the home runs. We saw the increase in the strikeout rate. The batting average wasn't necessarily there. He's not going to steal you any bases. So the question is really, do you think he make gains in batting average and some of that power? The Reds lineup is not great. And so I don't know. I just haven't really been in on him because I don't think he's special. I don't think that there's anything that carries the day. And if I can't really rely on him to have a high batting average, then I'd much rather take a guy that I can count on having a high batting average and figuring out how to compensate for that. In fact, like taking a guy who has a high batting average and he's going to get me a little stolen bases too, on the side. Like I can make up what Castellanos gives me. So I'm still not into him. I still haven't been able to pull the trigger, maybe if he falls a little bit. Meadows is a guy who's really hard because I was super into him last year. Obviously, you kind of give 2020 to COVID. But it's so hard just to do that, right? Like because we didn't have a huge sample size, but I absolutely loved him heading into last year. I absolutely loved everything that he was doing, and I think he is platoon proof on the Rays so long as he turns it up. And he's at a discount, so maybe I should be into him, but I just maybe like guys better going here. Steamer sees a pretty big drop in the batting average, which I think would be a big hit to him, but. Certainly a high ceiling, lowish floor guy. I think if he can have that power speed combo that he's shown in the past. So maybe I should be a little bit more into him. Again, you're just kind of chalk it up to COVID. And then Dom Smith, I'm not really into Dom Smith. I know people are really into him. But let me just get up his profile and remind myself why I'm not that into him. Oh, yeah. Okay. So 368 BABIP, I don't think that's going to necessarily hang around. He's got the low strikeout rate which resonates because the contact rate is pretty legit. In-zone contact rate is pretty legit. He doesn't have great plate discipline. And then I think he also still struggles against lefties, and so if they do have a very deep lineup, does he get platooned if he's not necessarily, let me just check out his career platoons right here. 237 batting average against lefties. And his WOBA, his WRC plus is still 104 against lefties. But not necessarily great. I just think, he had a really good year, but I just think that maybe he was playing a little bit above his head, and I don't necessarily buy 100% of the playing time. Especially if they're a little bit more analytically focused on the Mets now with the GM hire, which, by the way, I've never heard as so many glowing remarks about a GM hire, I think, ever. Like, everybody's like, what was I? I'll run through a wall for Jared Porter, and, like, he's the humblest, kindest, greatest guy on the face of the earth. So kudos to the Mets. I know the Mets fans must be really excited. Love that fan base. Absolutely. From this point forward, I am a diehard Mets fans. Let's go Mets. I have an inside joke with I've got these buddies that I go on a baseball trip with every year, and we have like a year-long like thread where we're always like just chatting back and forth. And my big joke, a bunch of them are big Mets fans, and there's a separate chat called the Mets chat, which is only Mets talk and only for like big Mets fans. And I keep on asking if they'll let me into the Mets chat because I'm a really big Mets fan every year, but they won't do it. So anyways, I am a big Mets fan. Let's go Mets, but not merely a Dom Smith fan. And I know we're going to stop pretty soon with the outfielders at this point, but I'll just say I really don't like taking outfielders in these last few groups. There's a couple guys in there that are of interest, like Lourdes Gurriel, but I think that the next group that we'll be covering is the group that I really want to be targeting, because I think it's a lot of guys that maybe were going in this spot in previous years, but have fallen back because of maybe small sample size or recency bias. So we'll get to them, I'm sure, later on, but that's kind of how I feel about this group of later outfielders in the top 100 of ADP. What about you?
So Toby is a Let's Go Mets fan, but he does not like Dom Smith. He does not like Michael Conforto. So just remember that, everybody. He's knocked off two of their top outfield draft picks right out the gate. But there is one in the next group that he likes a lot. So we'll leave it at that. But I'm with you on Conforto. I love Conforto. I love playing him in DFS when he's in the right matchup because he can smash. He's just a guy in season long that has shown a few injury concerns here and there. There's a lot of question marks in his overall production, like you mentioned. So, in like last year, even his draft price was a lot better. It was a lot more doable. Like where you're like, okay, cool. I like the 260 with this power and everything where he's going. But now you kind of have to compare apples to apples, and it's different. So it's tougher to go for there. I love Lourdes as well. I think draft prices going up a little bit, so it's a little trickier. But I like Lourdes a lot for a lot of the things you mentioned, and it made me think when you were talking. I kept looking at his StatCast page and his Fangraphs page. And I was looking at different things. And if I'm as in love with Teoscar Hernandez as I am, I should love Lourdes Gurriel just as much, if not more, for the 20 pick difference. Like what they have, Teoscar might hit it a lot harder. So like if he gets hot, his hot streak might really go. But I think Gurriel can sustain it longer. So it's one of those kind of floor meets ceiling scenarios where Gurriel can bring this just steady Eddie, awesome floor, really like good player that week in and week out. Maybe if you're like in a head-to-head league, unfortunately, you'd rather have a Gurriel who's going to steadily produce for you. But even at the end of the year, his stats are going to be good. But Teoscar has that ceiling, like I was mentioning, that if he really clicks, he's going to kind of go way past Gurriel. So it's kind of a catch you if you can type situation. So maybe if you miss on Teoscar or you don't want to take him at that point because you want another pitcher like you mentioned or you want something else, getting Gurriel your next go-around because it's 20 picks later, so pretty much your next pick, give or take, is an interesting scenario to go by. And you still have a very stud outfielder and a very good lineup, likely playing in hitter-friendly Buffalo again this year because I doubt he's in Toronto. I think that's a scenario to keep in mind with Gurriel that I was kind of thinking about as you're talking that kind of made the draft strategy tweak in my head that it's interesting to go off of. And then Castellanos, like his season was bad. I'm not going to downplay that at all. I still like him a lot in that ballpark and in that lineup. And when you look deeper into his stats, like his contact rates are not good. They're not good, but they've really never been good. That's just who Casty is. But 16% barrel rate, best of his career. He hit 225, but his ex-batting average was 273. Like, so something definitely went wrong there. His fly ball rate went down just a little bit, but not bad. His hard hit rate, best of his career at 46.7. Expo Bacon was 471. It's just a matter for me is the contact rates, like, and then his strikeout rate jumped 7%. So contact rates dropped even more. Strikeout rate went up. So the quality of that bats kind of went to crap. But when he was hitting the ball, he was still hitting it very, very well, the best he's ever hit it. And so it's one of those, does he make a slight tweak? And now we're back to a guy that's hitting 270 to 280, hitting you 30-plus homers, not stealing your bases. But in the middle of that Reds lineup, that's still going to be pretty good. It's interesting. I think there's something to be said about that. The price tag's a little steep, right behind Gurriel. Makes it tricky, but I'm not out on Castellanos just yet. It just depends on certain drafts I've been in, he's fallen. Certain he's going right about here, maybe a little earlier, which is tougher. But if he falls, he becomes interesting to me, very interesting, to say the least. Because I think there's he had a lot of bad luck last year thrown into he did have some issues at the plate. And it could have been a new home. That happens to a lot of guys their first year in a new home. So who knows what happened there. And then the last guy is Dom Smith we talked about. I'm with you. I'm just kind of confused on what to really expect from Dom Smith. Like, really, what do we do? You mentioned the platoon. Last year he was supposed to platoon with J.D. Davis, but then injuries opened up both playing time. If they go sign George Springer, do we have a platoon again with J.D. Davis? And, like, does McNeil slide somewhere? Like, where do these things move around, these moving pieces? That gets interesting. And then Austin Meadows, I agree you can probably knock it up to COVID. I'm with you. I've just never been an Austin Meadows guy. I just haven't – I don't know. It's just one of those things that could be one of my black holes in my analysis, like you're talking about, that maybe I need to go look into more because I know there's a lot of Austin Meadows fans. We have some questions on him we'll talk about in a little later. I just haven't been able to buy into Austin Meadows. I think there's a lot of streakiness there and a lot of still holes in that plate approach that really scared me last year, given, again, COVID. But even in the playoffs, he looked just absolutely lost, like so lost. It was terrifying to watch Meadows. So,
Bubba, I think what you need to do is just start off this way. You just got to start off and just ask yourself, who am I?
Yeah,
what am I doing here? How did I get here?
Yes.
And then move from there into your Austin Meadows analysis first, right? You just got to get that little shift, that kind of get outside your body and then kind of analyze him. I think you may come with a different perspective.
And Cubby Knowles in the chat, and I love Winker. We'll talk about him next week. Going much later than Castellanos. The difference between those two is Winker, somehow they still don't give regular playing time to, and annoys the living crap out of me. That's the biggest difference. If I knew Winker was going to be leading off like he usually does, playing every day, I'm with you. But Senzel somehow is going to creep in there still. Like, it's going to happen, and that's my biggest concern. But we'll see. Maybe things change in the offseason. But we went through 25 tonight. We'll go through 25 or so more next week. Make it a business decision. If we want to do more after that, we'll figure it out.
Part 3, I'd never thought I would see part 3 of an outfield preview, Bubba. Only on this podcast could you get that type of depth and insightful analysis? And by that, I mean being so long-winded that we have to move it to a part 3.
Hey, it's good.
One thing on Castellanos, as you were going through that, I was looking a little bit more at his profile. One thing that I do think bodes well for him as well is he had a career high of percentage of his hits that were to center field, 46.7, 46.7%. So about 13% higher than league average. And so it may be, I don't think that's probably an approach thing. I think it's probably like a small sample size, fluky type thing. And so that may be an example right there. I'm going to take a really quick look at his fly balls and see what he had there. Yeah, so we only pulled 15% of his fly balls. 54% went to center, only 30.5% to the opposite field. So essentially when he was hitting the ball hard and in the air, he was hitting it to dead center. And so if kind of natural regression happens, he doesn't pull a ton of fly balls as it is, but he does hit a bunch to the opposite field. And so if more of that tends to happen, then you could see that home run rate go up. So I will give you that point.
You'll see the home runs go up, or even maybe just the doubles because they go off the wall and so they get caught. Like things like that, just slowly. And then all of a sudden you're looking at a different batting average and everything. It changes a lot. So it's just, I'm not completely ready to write him off just yet, but it was an ugly season. Very, very ugly season. But the other reason we only got 25 tonight is we have a lot of listener questions, which are really awesome. And we talked before the show, if we go through like 40 outfielders and do listener questions, we'll be here for 3 hours. No one wants that. We don't want that. No one wants that. So let's do some of these listener questions. Matt Williams from Roto Fanatic over there. Longtime listener, first-time caller. I would like to know why the Giants don't like Austin Slater as much as I do. We need those at-bats. Well, I'll give you the Giants insight, which I tweeted to him and Sleepy K as they were talking. And the biggest problem, and it's not that he can't hit righties. He can. It's the platoon. That's what Gabe Kapler does. And that's just, I don't see that changing unless something clicks in that locker room that says, hey, we're not platooning anymore. Because I'm with you. If he's playing every day, he's a steal right now in drafts. Absolute steal. It's a little bit of power, lots of speed, lots to like. I just know Kapler is one of those guys that sure he likes the analytical approach to things, but he also is very regimented. And I don't see that changing. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, great OBP too, generally speaking. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, the data backs it up. Obviously, we can have a conversation about small sample sizes and splits and stuff like that, which, is well worth having. But like you mentioned, Bubba, this is what they do. I mean, this is what the Giants do. They're trying to maximize value by working those platoon splits. In his career, against lefties, he has a 290 batting average versus righties. He's got a 237 batting average.
It's not
against lefties. He has a 124 WRC plus, and he has an 86 WRC plus against righties, including a 32% K rate versus a 21% K rate against lefties. So it's not like this doesn't make sense. I mean, based on his career thus far, the way for the Giants to maximize his value is to play the reverse splits. And as fantasy players, it sucks. But from a baseball perspective, and again, outside of like conversations about how large of a sample size we need, to be able to look at, to determine whether somebody's going to have, splits or not, it is what it is. And, start the guy in DFS when he's going up against lefties. Although
like is beautiful.
Yeah. Although he'll probably get 2 at bats too, or 2 plate appearances he's going to get pinch hit for. But I mean, this is one of the things where we just need to be realistic about the difference between fantasy baseball and regular baseball. And I would love to have his stolen bases and his OBP in the lineup all the time, but it's just, we're just probably not going to see it. The one thing I'd say, let's see what his OBP is against. 325 against righties. So, he still walks a decent amount, but they can maximize the platoon in a much better way. Who is the lefty guy that they normally platoon him with?
They have Dickerson, who's out there.
And Dickerson's good. I mean, Dickerson can
out
mash.
there every day.
He can mash.
You have Dickerson, Dubon, and why am I slipping on my Giants here?
Slater, not Slater. Who's the other guy who I was confused with Slater?
I'm pulling up their roster right now. This is a great Giants fan of me, but they've changed a lot lately.
Will Clark, that's who it is. Will Clark.
Yastrzemski. How the hell did I miss that one?
Oh, God, yeah.
So Dickerson would be his platoon partner because Yastrzemski's not moving. So
and he can't play. Does he play center? Does
Dickerson Dubon plays center.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why it's just tough for Slater. The options aren't there. And then just to take it deeper though, and to give the other side of the coin here. So he hasn't done it in the majors. Like he had the small sample this past year where he was okay, but you mentioned overall in the majors, not great versus righties. But I'm up on Prospects Live right now. Look at the minor graphs. In 2019 in AAA, hit 303 with a 408 OBP. In 2018 in AAA, 356 with a 413 OBP.
This is against righties?
Against righties. In 2017 against righties, 315 with a 365 OBP. So he did it in the minors. He just hasn't done it in any stint in the major leagues.
Yeah.
So maybe he just needs more experience. I don't know, because that's been a thing I've always preached. Like Brandon Belt, I just mentioned it a million times to listeners. They said for years he could not hit lefties. That's why they platooned him. And then they finally let him hit lefties for one full season. Now he hits lefties just fine. Like, you got to let these kids do it, but they're going to platoon him because Alex Dickerson literally should play every day. He's that good. So I just don't see where Slater slides in without an injury. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and one thing to consider too is Slater's 28. So in those minor league seasons, I mean, he was way old for the level he was playing at as well. So
true. So yeah, we'll see. It sucks, but that's the Giants these days. I just saw I saw a headline on MLB tonight that after the season, there's like 6 of their highest contracts are all off the books. Like, oh man, it's gonna be beautiful. Farhan with money. I cannot wait for these.
They're gonna be,
and it's gonna be at an unfortunate discount because of these COVID years. They're gonna get guys cheaper.
In 3 years, it's going to be Giants against the Mariners in the World Series, and we're all going to be like, "What is going on?"
The Dodgers are going to start crying again. It's going to be great.
No,
Big Friendly Giant asks, okay, not necessarily outfield related. I notice I tend to have a very competitive roster in the first 2/3 of the season, only to have it lose steam and underwhelm at the end of a season. Is there a good way to prevent this? Notice I'm writing this after week 1 of the football playoffs. So sorry for your loss. This is a good question because in-season management is we're doing all this pre-season draft talk and all this. In-season management obviously is huge, and you are phenomenal at your fab. You're one of the best I know at running your team throughout a year. That's what you do. You spend hours at it. Like it's a full-time job for you at times. What do you recommend to him like right now to start thinking about, which is kind of, to me, tough because you kind of have to see how your team goes, and that's why it's in-season management. But what would you do now to get ready for that come later?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's anything that you can necessarily do now except try to think about your process. Just try to think about and go back and look at previous seasons and what happened. I mean, what I'm going to guess probably happened is, number one, as the season gets older, there are injuries that happen to your team, right? After the team that you drafted, there are injuries that happen. I think one of the things that we've talked about on that I need to get better at too is during the season is being familiar with how your players are doing, right? So if you have a guy who maybe started out really hot, like maybe you're the type of person who's really keen early on in that fab, and you add that guy who's scorching hot at the beginning of the season, and then you look at the overall stats for the season, you're like, oh, he's doing pretty well, but that regression is hitting pretty hard, and maybe he shouldn't be in your lineup. It could also be a question of how deep your league is. Like if you're in a 10 or 12 team league, I think one of the challenges would be that my cat, I don't know if you can hear my cat meowing in the background. You can't hear the cat meowing. The cat is gone now. My wife has performed a miracle and picked up the cat and is swooping him outside. I think one of the things that happens in 10 and 12 team leagues is we look at the name of the player and we're like, God, that guy's really good. I can't drop him. But the nature of that level, that depth of league is that everybody's going to be pretty good, right? And so what you got to figure out is who is good enough to hold on to, and who is there actually not that big of a difference between replacement level and that I can be working kind of the matchups on a week-to-week basis or, a game-to-game basis. It also depends on I just think one of the things that we don't spend enough time about is what are the settings of our leagues and how do those dictate player value? Or so if you're in a daily league, are you really working that grind? Are you checking the lineups every day to make sure that those guys are in? If you're in weekly lineup changes, are you making sure that you have the best matchups in all the time? And then, fab is such a huge part of the game. And so I really think like being ahead of curve on Fab, if at all possible, right? People are really sharp out there, but you got to be ahead of the curve. And so you got to be willing to take the shot at that guy who looks like they're breaking out, or being the first one to find out about the news or the lineup changes, monitoring the lineup changes, things like that. And it doesn't just need to be you like scrolling through the box scores. Find those folks on Twitter who will highlight that information for you, who are sharing that type of detailed notes that you can really track, right? Or, and then again, like develop that process about how are you identifying guys on the waiver wire and making sure that throughout the season, like there are those guys that you set it and forget it, and you should do that. Because over the course of a long season, they're going to be really freaking good. But like always towards the end of the season, make sure your guys are playing, make sure you're grinding, make sure you're continuing to work it, and then honing that process throughout the year. What are the metrics? Like what do you do for your Fab? If it's weekly, what are the metrics you're looking at? What are the leaderboards you're looking at? What are you looking for in players that you're trying to identify and pick up so that you can be the first one to identify those guys? And then if it's daily, you gotta be quick. If it's Fab, if it's first come, first serve, you gotta be quick on it. You gotta be following Twitter. You gotta be reacting. So I think those are just a few suggestions for the things that you can do. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to let me know. Reach out to me in my DMs. I'm happy to answer like that level of like specific question, as long as it's not like, super in depth. Happy to, kind of figure
out. Always ask the podcast, because we'll answer them weekly on that too. We'll talk about that. But you mentioned a lot of the stuff, the things I know I need to keep doing better. I fell into a similar spot for years. Like he's talking about, like I draft really well, my teams play well, and then as the season goes on, it's just like a real grind to keep things going. I think that looking ahead is big, like you mentioned. I think being willing to pull the trigger on guys a little early, dropping or adding, and being able to roll with that and just kind of see where it goes. Like if you hit on a couple of those guys, it goes a long, long ways to like making it work when you're not paying the exorbitant amount for these guys when you get them a week early. That's very important. You talked about it, Vlad, Scott Jenstead, some of these really phenomenal NFBC players, churning and burning your bench. Like when they draft, obviously when you're drafting, you plan on using your bench players. Yes. At the same time, you should be willing to add and drop a majority of your bench players most of the season. Like not all the time, but most of the time, you should be willing to get a 2-star pitcher because of this, or you move things around. Like at least have a couple guys, like 2 or 3 guys on your bench that you can be fluid with. So that's always important. And then I guess the other thing is when I'm making, and this is where I think you putting in all the hours on Fab that I don't put in. Like I put in a little time, but nothing like you. I think the biggest part for me is, okay, I know I need to add player X or Y or something. Now I need to put in like 7 bids for this guy, because if I don't get this player or this player, I need to make sure I fill his roster spot up with someone instead of losing out on 3 guys. And then I'm still stuck with this player. That was like, now I still have a dead spot on my roster. Stuff along those lines. Eventually, so you have usable parts every week, I guess, would go a long ways. So things like that. The next question, Ben Tidd at BreakingBen_T. Is your plan as of now to once again target outfielders in the pick 70 through 110 range, like last year where there were a lot of good talents, Ozuna, Castellanos, Laureano, etc.? So are you going early? You going middle? You going late? What's your outfield philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, generally, with the first few picks of the draft, I'm not thinking too much about that. Like I've taken Tucker. I think outfield is really deep. And I think what I mean by deep is I think there is like a point around maybe pick like 210, 220, where it dries up. There's a fairly significant difference, I think, between the guys kind of going before then. I'd actually draw it. I mentioned Andrew Mccutchen. I'd kind of draw it at that Andrew Mccutchen line. Maybe that was like the last outfielder that I was really interested in here. There's still really good guys, but I think how it's deep is that when you have outfield spots open later on, like there's a lot of different profiles that you can kind of mix and match in there, right? Like if you're low on speed, you're going to have some guys like Lorenzo Cain going later, or, Leody Taveras who's going later, or, even Victor Robles who's going later. So you have that kind of guy. If you're looking exclusively for power, right? You have guys like, Randall Grichuk going later. You have like Justin Upton who's going super late, who I really like a lot, heading into next year. Schwarber's going like at pick like 192, I think is his ADP right now in the last couple weeks. So you have a lot of power right there. Even with batting average, Michael Brantley is going, around pick 160 or so. So you have all these different ways that, like, if you have open outfield spots, you can find ways to kind of fill needs. And certainly there are those guys in different positions, but I think there's just a little bit more flexibility that it gives it with you. With that being said, I really like the 100, a little bit after 100 in the outfield section. So I'd say like, kind of the, I don't know. Do I actually like that? Maybe it's even later. I mean, I just think there's a lot of values. Like, I know you and Cubby Noel in the chat were talking about Charlie Blackmon. I don't necessarily I think he's solid value there. I don't necessarily love him, but like, you got like a Tommy Pham and an Eddie Rosario. You have a Tommy Edman. You have a Dylan Carlson, who I like a lot. You have a Ramon Laureano. So you kind of have those guys. And so if you grab like an outfielder or two earlier on in the draft because they're the best, players for your team build or for value perspective there, I think that's great. But I do think there's a lot of later outfielders going, and maybe it's even the later outfielders that I like. I mean, I love there's Nick Solak is actually really interesting to me. Michael Brantley. You have Grichuk. You have Leody Taveras, who I like a lot. You have Andrew McCutchen. So I just think throughout there are some pretty solid values. So, I just think for me, it's much more about like having a lot more different profiles later on with outfield, especially around speed, because with a lot of the infield positions, if a guy has speed and they are in the infield, then they're going higher up, like just by, kind of virtue of being on the infield and having some speed. So that's kind of my, I guess, general approach to outfield. I just think it's a lot more flexible than other positions at the profiles that are available at different parts in the draft.
Yeah, no, it's the biggest part is you mentioned you can fill roster or statistical needs with outfielders late that you can't always in other positions that late in the draft. So that's always big. I'm not purposely targeting certain spots of the draft with outfielders because the biggest thing I'm telling myself this year is, you go into a draft saying these positions are weak, like second base and whatever, but I'm not forcing myself to take a player that isn't great when there's a better outfielder on the board that'll give me better stats where I can go get a different player later at the position if I have to, even if it's a Starling Castro or something, knowing at that point in the draft it changes, like the 1-for-1 at that point in the draft, things are different. So it's, again, know the player pool and what you're doing. So I have been ending up with more outfielders than usual early in the draft. At the same time, I have a lot of Phams. I have a lot of McCutchens. Like, I'm getting those guys late as well. So I'm not picking a spot in the draft per se, but when I go through the draft, I'm not forcing myself to say, okay, I need to take a second baseman right now because they suck, so let's take Brandon Lau. No, I'm not going to take Brandon Lau. I'll go take something else over here. Stuff along those lines to kind of justify where I'm going. All right. The next question from MS at SMMS79. Are there any primary infield players with outfield eligibility that may be better suited in an outfield role on your fantasy team due to the lack of depth in the outfield? Any interest in reaching a bit to secure Dylan Carlson? So we both like Dylan Carlson, as he just said. I'm not going to reach for him, but I like him. So if you want a round earlier or so, 2 rounds, sure. Okay. But at that point in the draft, cool. But I haven't looked totally deep at the positional flexibility, but more often than not, when they have infield consideration, they're usually more valuable in the infield. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for most guys, it's you're going to want to play them in the infield. I just think that's the nature of, for me, a lot of it. But the position eligibility is really helpful, right? Because during a season, like, I'm drafting DCs, so it's super helpful to have a lot of position flexibility there, just because you can't use FAB. But even with a FAB league, it may be that you have drafted a guy like Solak, for instance. I'll just mention him because he pops up, where Solak is your middle infield guy. And then you're looking at the waiver that week and, Jose Iglesias has a fantastic matchup for the Angels. And that happens to match up what you need, and he's on your FAB wire. Well, and your util's filled by some excellent hitter because you're an excellent drafter. So your middle infield, in that particular case, like being able to move him to outfield, you have 5 outfield spots. And if Solak is better than one of those 5 outfielders, and you shift him over, you add Iglesias and you slip in there. So there's still value in that. But I think like when you're comparing for me, and I know, maybe if it's shortstop outfield, there's not a lot of guys that have that. But if it is shortstop outfield, maybe you're looking at outfield in that particular case, because I do think shortstop continues to be the deepest position. Maybe in that particular case, but I think generally speaking, you're going to want to stick him in the outfield. Stick him in the infield. And then Dylan Carlson, we'll talk about him next week, but I really like Dylan Carlson a lot. I think he's a 2010 type of guy. And I think, I think there's definitely ceiling there for him.
Yeah, we'll talk about him next week, but I'd rather have Dylan Carlson than Lou Bob. So let's just go that route.
Wow. Like straight up.
I would rather have those.
Paul Abdul straight up. Now tell me.
Yep. Straight
do
up.
You really want to love me forever?
Forever and ever and ever.
Okay. I'm just making sure.
Yep.
We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that next week, though. Dave Swan at Davithius, he asks, what are we to make of Austin Meadows? And we kind of hit on that. Like, I am just completely lost. I need way more of a deep dive. I've never been an Austin Meadows guy. Before, it was because he was drafted so high. Now you get a discount, some may say. I'm still like so just lost watching those at-bats in the postseason. But if you want to recap what you had there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on. I think it is one of those questions that is just a major question. It is one of those questions that's just a major question. We're getting to that point in the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, where I start to lose it. No, I mean, I think it really is like this question of what do we do with the 2020 season, and especially a guy like that who got COVID, because with Moncada, we're willing to do that. I think,
I think he's more vocal about it. Like Meadows really didn't let us know like what was going on.
Totally. And maybe that's what it is, but should that matter, right? But the projections certainly seem to have Meadows a lot lower than they would have had him otherwise. And then they had him last year. So they're buying into it, but are they COVID agnostic, right? Probably, right? They probably haven't integrated COVID. So maybe that's a source of value that you can get. So it's just one of those existential questions of fantasy baseball about like, how are you approaching the 2020 season? And it's a good one. And it's actually challenges me because I'm not into Meadows at all or drafting him, but I was so into Meadows last year. So what is it? So I got to think about that a little bit more. And it's also one of these questions where come March or April, whenever we're drafting, because Major League Baseball is ridiculous. We should have more info from spring training about how guys look. And those are the types of guys where maybe you want to focus a little bit more. You want to follow what the interviews say. And so it may just be a question where early on in drafts, I'm generally staying away from a lot of these guys who maybe have these types of questions, because I know I'll have more information closer to the draft and I can make a better choice. And I like to operate with maximum information. Yeah,
I'm 100% with you. Like, yeah, if I find out this, that, or that with him, I'm with you. Like, I'll be willing to kind of move up a little bit on that situation, but definitely have to wait for that. Richard Kolaski asks, at R. Kolaski, now that you've covered infield and outfield, how would you rank each position in terms of depth? I think we agree shortstop's the best, the deepest. Outfield, obviously, most likely second deepest. And then it just kind of, I think first base and third base are interesting, kind of similarities there than second base and catcher.
Yeah. Yeah, I might go. I'd have to really think about it a little bit more, but yeah, catcher is worst. I'll do it the opposite way. Shortstop, yeah, outfield. I think at that point, I might actually be higher on second base, maybe just because I think there's some pretty good values earlier on in drafts.
Good value. I'm with you there.
And then maybe third base, first base.
Yeah, it's close.
I think third base. I don't like third base.
I don't like it at all. I think it dries up real quick.
I don't like third base at all this year. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna have a lot of Evan Longoria. To be honest with you, I'm gonna have a lot of Evan Longoria
in a best ball for that same reason.
He's my third baseman in a DC. But yeah, that's how I'd kind of rank him, I think.
All right, Daniel Prepus, very good player, asks us, why is Kirilloff not a top 150 pick since he's starting opening day? I like Kirilloff, don't get me wrong, but we haven't seen it. That's my best answer for you.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at his steamer projection, obviously the plate appearances are lower, 479. He's hitting 277, 16 home runs, 7 stolen bases. So it's certainly a solid profile and definitely one worth kind of a late round stab. I don't know what their plans are. I haven't read anything particularly on what the Twins are planning to do with Kirilloff. Let's see.
Like if you look at Rocky, DH 6 in a platoon.
It has him at DH. You have to think that they're going to, improve upon Jake Cave, if not platoon him. I know you love Jake Cave. I love Jake Cave too, but and with Kirilloff, yeah, I mean, we'll see how confident they are going in with him as the DH. Maybe they do that, and if they do that, and he looks like he's going to get the full plate appearances, then certainly that could be an opportunity for for some nice little value. So that's kind of my perspective. And while you're going to do that, I'm going to look up his Steamer 600.
I don't mind him late in the draft. Like the value is great, but like Jared Kalinic's at 220, and we know what I think most of us would agree he's much better than Kirilloff. Kirilloff's at 350 though, so that's a nice gap in price difference. So deep in drafts, sure, give it a shot, but I'd like to know exactly what the Twins plan on doing, because you'd imagine they either go and get a DH or another outfielder. I'm with you. So how does that shake things out?
Yeah, let's see. I'm looking for Kirilloff here in this steamer. He should be around 10 stolen bases, I think. Let's see if I can predict where that stolen base mark is. I can't. Sorry, this is not compelling podcasting, guys. I really apologize, but I want to see where Kirilloff ends up.
You're seeing a 10 o'clock rabbit hole, people. This is what happens.
Yeah. Oh man, what's he at? This is going to be so. He's probably not even in outfield. All right, I'll keep looking. You can go to the next question, and then when I find it, I won't waste people's time.
Our buddy Dave Duncan, he asks, how do you rank someone like Willie Calhoun? Is he off your board, or are you willing to gamble at a certain price? I'm definitely willing to gamble at a certain price. I understand the trepidation because it was absolutely horrific what Willie Calhoun's done so far, but it's one of those things where he's getting drafted. I'm pretty sure we'll talk about him in the coming weeks. He's a 74th outfielder out the board. No, that's Cole Calhoun. Willie Calhoun's the 85th outfielder out the board at pick 314. I think there's some value there for a guy that is slated to play every day and bat third. Now, that could easily change if he slumps again. He won't be batting third. But we know the hit tool's there. It just hasn't, come to fruition in the bigs. He's been injured a lot, some fluky injuries, getting hit in the, concussion and broken jaws and stuff like that. I think that's a little fluky, but we've seen him hit phenomenal in the minor leagues. I really believe that's going to click here sooner than later. The kid's 26 years old at that price point. Like, if you're willing to take a chance on Alex Kirilloff, why wouldn't you be willing to take a chance on Willie Calhoun? Minus the stolen bases. I get that. But the overall hit tool, I have no problem taking a chance on him. What about you?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, he's, again, one of these guys, super high contact profile. The all of the batting metrics were way out of whack. And obviously with the horrific injury he suffered, the broken jaw with, a fastball, you gotta imagine that sits with a guy for a little bit. But he was also really unlucky at 214 BABIP, a 2.9% home run per fly ball rate. Obviously, he only had one barrel, so he wasn't crushing the ball. His max exit velo was down. But a guy at his age, that really shouldn't happen, I don't think, especially with the hit tool that he has. Steamer has him at 258, 23 home runs, 2 stolen bases, which is just kind of like generic what everybody gets. So maybe a little bit of a capped ceiling because of that, but you could see the batting average maybe being higher because of the contact rate, and there could be some pop. So he might be a good guy to kind of bank on, especially at the price that he's going with. I think it's a pretty solid floor that he's dealing with, especially what you mentioned, like he should get plate appearances pretty consistently. So
yeah, I'm willing to take a chance. The pedigree's there. It's just been a rocky road for him in the bigs. So at that price point, pick 315, sure. Aaron Pags at Fantasy Triage asks, for us relief pitcher dopes, do you treat outfielders similar to starting pitching? Specifically, do you target players to be your outfielder 2, outfielder 3, or do you not care where you get offensive stats from, and therefore only draft outfielders when they are the top player on your board. I mentioned earlier it's more of a top player thing. I'm not focusing on when, where, filling slots situation like a starting pitcher. So yeah, top players for me.
Yeah, same here. Obviously, yeah, I mean, I've had drafts where I draft my full infield before I even touch outfield, and I feel totally comfortable doing that. So I think it's more best player available that fits your roster construction, your team build, is the way to go there. And I mean that in the vast majority of cases, early on in drafts, that's obviously going to be the situation, recognizing like what profiles are available within each position at any given time.
All right, our buddy Comac has got a two-parter. One question for you, one question for me. For you, score prediction for tomorrow's match and who gets the goals, Liverpool, Tottenham.
All right. I'm going to say, of course, I'm going to go 2-1 Liverpool. I'm going to say Liverpool gets out to a 2-0 first half lead, and then Tottenham scores 1 goal towards the end. I'm going to go with Son. I think Son is going to be the goal scorer for Tottenham because he's by far your best player. The rest of your team is garbage. And for Liverpool, I'm going to go with, it seems like a Sadio Mane game. So I'm going to go with Mane and Salah. I think that Mo Salah is like the greatest thing on the face of the earth. But I think Mane has been in a little bit of a rut. I feel like he hasn't scored much recently. So I think he's going to get a goal. I think it's this always happens to Liverpool. It's like, we have this front three, our 3 forwards who are really good, and they just kind of take turns leading the charge. And I think Mo Salah has done that for the first part of the season. I think this is the beginning of our Sadio Mane run right here. So sorry, Comac, no shot tomorrow. Liverpool 2, Tottenham 1.
Awesome. And the question for me, which team needs George Springer the most, Giants excluded? And it's kind of a fun, who needs them the most and who's going to get him are two different questions. So this is where it's fun. In all honesty, Houston needs him back. That would be a great starting spot. You have Miles Straw and Chaz McCormick as 2 of your projected outfielders. They might need him back. I think that's a starting point there. Toronto's rumored to get everybody. White Sox is interesting. You mentioned Eaton. Another spot, we've kind of mentioned them in a roundabout way a few times. If the Twins don't bring back Nelson Cruz, that's a lot of available money. And there's your Jake Cave situation real quick. And now you don't draft Alex Kirilloff anymore. But you could put Springer in left field because I don't think he's a go-to center fielder anymore like he once was. You got Buxton out there who, hey, we know Buxton might get injured too. Another reason to have Springer on board. I think Minnesota, if they want to stay near the top of the Central, would be a sneaky spot for him because I don't think I've heard that rumor at all. In reality, though, Houston needs him the most. Like that team – its lineup looks dreadful. And if I have to pick a National League team, I'm going to go with the Washington Nationals. I think that'd be a heck of a landing spot. You have Andrew Stevenson, Victor Robles, and Juan Soto. Obviously, Soto's fine. Robles should be fine. I don't hate Stevenson. I know Vlad Sedler was tweeting about him today, but I think obviously Springer got to be a bit of an upgrade there. So I think the Nats, if they want to stay competitive for a few more years, that'd be a good landing spot as well. All right.
By the way, Kirilloff, 20 home runs, 9 stolen bases, over 600 plate appearances, his steamer projection with a 277 batting average. That's solid. I think that's worth a late round pick for sure.
Steve Brunn asked, thoughts on the guys that just had dreadful 2020s? Guys like Willie Calhoun. We just talked about Willie Calhoun. Austin Meadows, talked about him. Victor Robles and Oscar Mercado. Guys that had some buzz last year at this time and no showed in 2020. Thanks for keep doing what you guys do. So we talked about 2 of those. What's your thoughts real quick on Victor Robles and Oscar Mercado?
So I think they're both solid. I mean, Victor Robles, where he's going now, he doesn't need to do the things that you needed him to do last year to return value. If he steals 20 bases and hits 10 home runs, which he's more than capable of doing with like a 230 batting average, he'll return that value. And so I think that he's fine. And I think there's definite upside there. We've talked about the max exit velo, and Alex Chamberlain has done an article since about that. I think he's not that good of a hitter, but he's still young enough where maybe some of that could develop, and he's going to play every day because defensively he is really, really good. And then I think, who was the second one?
Oscar Mercado, who doesn't even have
Mercado. Mercado's free, and Cleveland is awful. So, I mean, if he does well, you know, he could really do well. So late round pick, sure. Go with Mercado. I liked him a lot heading into last year. So no reason to kind of totally abandon that heading into this year. So I think those guys are fine. I mean, one guy who I've mentioned a few times on the pod who we'll talk about next week that I think is really interesting is Leody Taveras, because I think very similar profile to Robles with, I think, a better hit tool, batting at the top of the lineup. You know, definitely some batting average concerns, but I think Robles has those obviously as well. So, you know, that's kind of what has kept me away from Robles so far is Leody Taveras. And I think as drafts move up, I think you're going to see Taveras going much, much earlier in drafts, 150, 120, you know, spots like that.
Yeah, and if you look at his steamer projections, he's like 16 homers, maybe a little steep, but I could see it. I really could. 22 stolen bases, 251, like you said, where he's getting drafted now. That's fine. Like that's actually a pretty solid stat builder for you overall, especially if they ever put him towards the top of the order. That'd be amazing. But yeah, I like the Leody Taveras shot. We'll talk to him for sure. I think that's a sneaky upside play. And the only thing with Mercado is I agree, if he plays every day, there could be some big upside after what we saw. Right now, he's not projected to play every day. I mean, he's going around the same time as Kirilloff. I might take the gamble on Kirilloff at that point in the draft. So that gets a little more interesting there. And the last question we have from our buddy Dave Petroziello. The bloom seems to be off the Nick Senzel rose. Can he still be what we thought? And this is one I've been battling pretty much every draft I'm in, and I literally just took him in my fourth best ball here recently. Pick 255. It's the price point is very intriguing. I'll be honest. You know, the injuries have been a pain in the butt. He's 25 years old still. He's super young. Prospect pedigree is great. He's got a similar stat line to a Victor Robles, according to Steamers. He's like 120 picks later. I'm willing to take a chance on Nick Senzel at that point in the draft. Just know there's some question marks. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, he's reasonable. The injuries are really tough, you know. I mean, he's never, and this isn't just major leagues. You know, he had a lot of issues in 2018 as well. I mean, I think he had vertigo or something like that. So it always seems to be something, but certainly that same potential is absolutely there for him. So yeah, I think it's fine. You know, I mean, I think around that point in drafts where he's going, like, you know, I think that's the time to take those type of risks with guys where, you know, I think later on in drafts you can get some outfielders to kind of fill in for him a little bit, but he certainly, you know, he has the pedigree, he has the potential. He's just got to kind of put it together. And I mean, you know, if you look at his projection, 15-14, 254 batting average, 455 plate appearances, you know, if that's kind of 3/4 of his 600 plate appearance pace, that's almost a 2020 season if he's getting full-time at bats. So yeah, I mean, I think he's definitely somebody that you can go for. I think that the thing you got to figure out with those types of guys is there's handfuls of those guys. And so the question is, who are you picking to be that guy who takes that leap? And you can pick a bunch of different guys and hope that you hit on one. You know, sometimes you see something in some guy or another that makes you, you know, lean more towards that guy. And I think that's just the case. You know, that's kind of the bucket of players that he falls into, is those kind of upside guys.
Yeah, he's one of those upside guys. He's one of those guys that I could see, you know, maybe having a slow start or something, but he could also put like a month together where you're just like, wow, that's what we wanted. So he could be a frustrating guy to try to own and then drop and then add and drop. Like, that could be frustrating. I guess definitely worth the gamble, like you mentioned. Plan on drafting something for stability, like you said. And we talked about earlier with the in-season management, realize that he is a risk and you might need to drop him early. Like, that's just one of those deals. Say he is in a platoon with Yakiyama or whatever. He's not playing enough. You just gotta drop him and live with the results if somehow he gets regular playing time and smokes you later. That's just how it goes. But he could be a dead roster spot for a while. All right.
One thing on Mercado, just because I thought it was interesting, his 600 plate appearance projection is 15 home runs, 21 stolen bases, and a 250 batting average. Which yeah. I mean, you'd take that, right? So maybe if he has a hot spring, he kind of shoots up drafts a little bit. But if he gets playing time, he could be a real value where he's going.
Yeah, no, like at this point in the season, those are the kind of guys that are worth drafting late in the draft and see what happens, like 100%. So, because he will get the helium if that happens. But all right, that'll wrap us up for Outfielder Preview Part 1. 25 guys in the book. We'll get you 25 to 30 or so next week. I think they'll go a little quicker now that the big names are kind of out of the way. So that'll mix things up a little bit more. But we'll get you a Preview Part 2 next week. Hopefully more questions involved. If you have any questions, let us know. But also follow Toby on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy, as you probably already do. I'm on Twitter at BDintric. And until next week, this was Bubba the Bat Flip, episode 62. Catch you guys later.